the topic and everything, so we won't stand too much on ceremony or anything. I'm right now typing my information up, and I'm going to drop it in the chat just so everybody can introduce and everybody knows who else is here today. In the chat would be great. Chad, if we could have the TAC members themselves probably introduce themselves and then approve the minutes, and then we can get going on the agenda whenever you're ready. So thanks everybody.
That's great. Sounds great. Thank you. Yeah, and as Jeremy said, if you could just enter your name and your affiliation in the chat, be able to get that as part of notes. Just for disclosure, the meeting, I think, was noted, and so you'll see the recording up there. I will ask them to introduce themselves. So if I could look with
Chad, just so you know, you're breaking up pretty bad. I don't know if you need to stop the video or not, but you're coming in and out pretty frequently. And now you look frozen.
All right. Does that sound better, Jeremy?
No. Some echo, so if everybody else will mute if you're not talking, that would be great.
So I muted my computer, so that might have helped.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, good. Apologies for that, everybody. It looks like folks have been kind of introducing themselves through the chat window. And Jeremy, while I'm on the phone here and we're doing introductions, I am going to reset my router in an effort to try to figure out what's going on. My internet connection apparently is unstable all of a sudden. So have folks started introducing themselves? I saw Linda type in through chat, but did you want to do voice introductions?
Yeah, I can go ahead and have them do voice introductions while you're doing that, Chad. That'll be fine. So I'll just go through the TAC members in order. Jeff, would you go first? You're on mute, Jeff.
Sorry about that. Hear me now? Yeah, Jeff Nelhouse.
Yes.
I'm with the consultant with the Assessment Solutions Group. I was formerly testing director and deputy commissioner of education in Massachusetts, and was also chief of assessment with the Park Consortium.
And Bob, would you introduce yourself?
So Bob Henson, I'm the Associate Dean of Research out of University of North Carolina, Greensboro.
Okay, and Linda?
Linda Poole, I'm a teacher with the Papillion La Vista Community Schools and a board member with the Millard Public Schools.
And Cindy?
I'm Cindy Gray. I'm the Associate Superintendent at Elkhorn Public Schools. Okay.
As our presenters speak today, would it be great if you would introduce yourself again as we get ready to present each of the topics. Chad, if once you're back and ready, you can introduce yourself, and then we're ready to do the minutes, and then we'll be able to go on.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, just really quickly, my name's Chad Buckendahl. I am one of the partners with ACS Ventures. And yeah, let's go ahead and take care of the minutes. Just in terms of approval of minutes from the TAC, are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes that Stacy provided?
Look good to me.
I have none.
Okay. Okay, if we don't have any, then I'm just going to take kind of through consent that the minutes will be approved as presented, and we'll go ahead and move on to the first topic. And Jeremy, are you able to kind of set the stage for that?
Yeah, I definitely can. So last time when we came together, we talked a little bit about NSCAS growth simulations. We were able to meet with a smaller group of TAC members and get some into a couple of working sessions. I appreciate that additional work that we had there. It was very useful and the conversations were great. And I think Melinda has some updates around those simulations and some changes that were made, different approaches that were looked at. So whenever you are ready, Melinda, you can go ahead and present the information.
All right, that sounds good. So I am Melinda Montgomery. I'm a psychometrician at NWA. And let me share my slides here. And display. Oops. There we go. Can everyone see?
Yep, looks
Perfect.
good.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So, whoops, I'm trying to move the picture over out of the way and I move the slides. Here we go. So over the past several months, as Jeremy just alluded to, NWA has been fine-tuning the test model in preparation for the winter pilot. So following the working sessions with NDE and several TAC members, we set up some parameters around these simulations, and that's what we executed on over the past couple of weeks and what I'll be presenting on. So we settled on a test length of 40 items for these simulations, 27 on-grade NSCAS items following the blueprint, and then 13 diagnostic growth items. So the reason we did 27 is because we are hoping that that 27 will be enough to allow us to provide reporting category information. So as you may recall, for spring 21, we only have 23 items, and that was not sufficient in some reporting categories to be able to report out on subscores. We only are able to do the content area. So we're hoping that with 27, that will give us enough to be able to do that. The preliminary model also is only using NSCAS items. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, just can you define what you mean by diagnostic growth items? Are these the off-grade items or?
They're on and off grade, and I'll show you some examples, but they're on and off grade. So it's a refocusing of the test model after 27 items. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute.
Thanks.
Just to remind everyone who's not in the weeds with me every day
Yeah.
during this. So the preliminary model then is only using NSCAS items. We plan to add map growth. We don't have that link established. We're waiting on the summer linking study. So we're just setting this baseline as only NSCAS items. And we also decided to focus on grade items before going on and off grade. So even if a student needs diagnostic support or diagnostic feedback, if there are on grade items that they haven't seen in the first 27, we're going to favor those before we go off grade. That's what we decided to do for this particular setup. So for the simulations runs, we did 1,000 theta estimates based on the distribution of Nebraska students. So we had a theta estimate representing the population at each of these grades. We did grades 4, 5, and 6 for both ELA and math. So some of the questions I want you to think about as we walk through this is, based on the results so far, what additional updates would you recommend as we prepare for the winter pilot? And then do you agree, based on these results, that this model configuration can serve as a basis for the winter pilot, keeping in mind that our intention is to add additional NSCAS and map growth items this summer, following both the alignment of field test items to the NSCAS pool and the linking study with map growth. So those are kind of the questions we're going to think about. This is a basis for the winter pilot, and we hope to build upon this, but we want to get your feedback. All right, so here's a reminder of what the 3-year model is about. So this 3-year model is designed to establish where a student is performing with the on-grade content as compared to like an achievement level. So low ability, average ability, high ability. You can set that however the state wants to set it. So so we determine where the student is based on our probability of classification, low, average, high, and on those first 27 items. Once the engine has classified where that student is, it switches focus to either a diagnostic or a growth kind of measure. So for content areas of weakness during the on-grade part, then the engine will focus on those content areas and provide either more on-grade content or below-grade content to kind of maybe hone in on where that student's specific weakness might be in that area. For high-performing students, they're able to see more challenging items from both on and off-grade content at the higher ability level. The average ability students can see both. There might be one particular area of weakness. The engine might give them some diagnostic feedback. It also might give them some off-grade depending on where they fall. So questions about the design before I move on? No? Okay. Well, here comes the fun part, simulation results. So first one we have is reliability. So this is reliability from the simulations for all 40 items. So this includes on and off grade content. And you can see that we're getting very good reliability, 0.92 and above for ELA, 0.94 and above in math for all 3 grades using all 40 items. And we have a pretty low RMSE. The SEM is also good. We're not concerned about any of this. Now these values change slightly when we go to 27, the first 27, but still our reliability is 0.88 for ELA and above, and then 0.91 for math. The RMSE goes up a little bit, so does the SEM. That's because we only have 27 items. We've gone from 40 to 27. You're going to lose a little bit of precision with that, but still our reliabilities are very good across all grades for both subjects. One of the other things we look at is how well the engine is doing in terms of the true theta and final theta. And this is for all 40 items again, doing very well with true and final theta and item difficulty, 0.95 and above. It's doing very well, we believe, in terms of choosing items. So the selection theta and item difficulty is also very strong for 40. And this is on and off grade items, remember 40 items. Then the 27 item, just the on grade portion. Again, true and final theta is quite high. So is the final theta and item difficulty. The engine's doing a good job, this would tell us, of selecting items appropriate for the student ability as they move through the test during the first 27 items. Questions so far? Okay. So one area of struggle that we're still having is with the content area blueprint matching. So you'll see that we're not matching what we expect is 6 vocabulary, 15 reading comprehension, and 6 writing skills. We're not matching those. This has to do with the fact that we're running this in the sandbox rather than running it with the full CBE. Our full CBE has additional features that the sandbox version doesn't, which is why for spring 21, we have 100% matching for all of our categories. So that's what we would expect to see, 100% matching in each one of those, and then we'd be able to calculate reporting category subscores and reliabilities. So that's the difference here. We believe we've checked this with our engineers who are responsible for the engine, and they concur that that's what it is. There's a feature that is not in the sandbox that exists in the full CBE that will account for this. But so we're not getting great matching with, not as great matching as we'd like with ELA. It's better for math, part of it due to passages. So here's math. You can see math is quite a bit higher, closer to 100%, but still not quite 100%, even in math for the matching rate. Again, this will resolve itself when we go to the full CBE. So this is not something we're really concerned about at this point, but I want to, for your awareness, that's what's happening. All right, so in terms of the items that are given to students, about 65% of the items are given during the first 27 first 27 block of items given to students. So when you see this ELA grade 4, you'll see that we have 10% going down below in 3rd grade, 6% above in 5th grade. We're going off grade for both math and ELA, above and below. But obviously most of the items are on grade. So 4th grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 5th grade. That's by design. We chose the engine, set it up to do that, to focus on grade first before going off. So this is actually doing what we expected it to do.
Melinda, could you pause on that for just a moment?
Sure.
Because it looks so the text suggests that about 65% are delivered on grade, are delivered as part of the first 27. But then looking at that trace, it suggests that it's higher than that. So is 65% underestimating what the distribution really is, or?
No, this is 82%. So 65% is within that. This is over 40, and this would be over just the 27. If you're just counting on the 27 out of 40, this is over all 40 items.
Okay.
This is probably not a very clear table. As I'm looking at it now, I can see how that could be confusing. I need to clean that up. So no, it's within this. So that what I'm saying is that it looks like 82% of the items are going for only on grade, but that's because 27 items are absolutely defined to be on grade. They don't have an option. So 27 of those total items are on grade. So that's why you see such a larger number in the middle. And again, that's by design. We wanted 27 on grade. And then even in the diagnostic section, we're favoring on grade over off grade. But we are still going off grade, both for all, to some degree. I'm going to show you an example of that in just a second. Does this make sense so far?
Yeah, so those averages are across the population that took the test?
The simulation, yeah, across the simulation.
All right, so that's it.
Okay, so I'm going to show, stop sharing this. I'll come back to the next thing will be some of the scoring. But before we get to that, I'm going to show you some examples of what this looks like for a typical student, typical set of students, I should say. So let me orient you to this for those of you who haven't seen this kind of thing before. So what I have is I selected a set of students out of the simulation. So it's just like a typical very small class, about 18 students. And I've ordered it by ability estimate. So I've ordered it by the low ability to high, so -2 and up. And then I have this in item order, and item order is just so that we can see how the content is being distributed. Now we know the content is not matching in ELA, but this kind of tells you what the student is seeing as they go across. And then they get to item 27. Most students transition at item 27. There are a couple of cases where it's item 28, but item 27 would be here. So then this continued, as you can see, it drops down. It's still giving 4th grade items, but it's giving quite a bit lower. It's finding more low difficulty items for that student. And then it actually towards the end does go over and give some 3rd grade items. The next student also is getting some 3rd grade items here. Those 3rd grade items match up with, I don't know if I have it highlighted over here or not. I don't think I do in this one. Some of them I have it highlighted where their area, oh, here's one. So here's a case where a student is not getting these right. So it's, they're getting a 0. It's worth 1 point, and they're getting 0. Here's 4.1.6. The student is missing a lot of those items in 4th grade. So we come all the way over to item 27. We give them a few more 4th grade items in that same area, and then it does switch over to 3rd grade items in that same area. And so this is doing what we expect it to do for the lower ability students. At the high end, and this is very high, 3.4 is our true theta here. This student is getting a lot of 5th grade items once they get into the diagnostic growth section. There are some 4th grade items at the beginning, a few, but then they switch over to 5th grade and they're getting a lot of 5th grade items. You see above also getting a lot of 5th grade content at the high end. We saw a similar pattern with math. I can show you the math one. Here's a math. This is a very low ability student, -3 is their theta estimate. And you see they get a lot of 3rd grade items in this diagnostic section. because they are a low achieving student. And so we're going down and getting a lot of diagnostic information for that particular student. And then as we go up to the high end, we have the high ability students, and I have some pretty high. I randomly chose these, and I might have chosen some pretty high achieving ones here. And they're getting mostly their fifth grade content for this fourth grade student. Let me stop there and see
Melinda,
questions and thoughts. Yes.
for this, did we limit on the simulation? Did we limit to one grade above and one grade below?
We did.
Okay.
We did. We limited to one grade above and one grade below, largely because we're using only on grade, we're only using NSCAS pool, and we don't have the ability to go too far above and below.
Right. So we still haven't made decisions about limits of those types of nature. So we might very well let them go beyond that. But because we just have the NSCAS pool right now without the map
That's
growth items, we haven't run those simulations because they are going to add quite a bit of items to a lot of items to the item pool. So we'll continue to run those after the linking study. I just wanted to point that out.
Yes, that's true. There will be additional studies that will run once we have those additional map growth items that we can then deliver in the diagnostic section. At the moment, we were limited. We purposely forced the engine to go only one above and one below.
So this is math. How does it work? Are you going to show us how it works for ELA?
That was the first one. This
Yeah.
one.
So I'm just thinking, what if for ELA?
This is ELA right here.
Okay, but if it goes to a grade level below, is it going to choose a passage set so all the items would be at that third grade level?
Yes. Yes.
So that's why you would get repeated items at that level.
Yes, you get like chunks of them. Yes. Exactly.
You might get some difference in the p-value in those types of things because there's usually 10 or more items per passage, depending on how many were successful or not. And so they might not get all of the items from the passage. They might get a subset of those items as they work through it. But you're absolutely correct. They're going to get several items at the very least for that passage before that pushes them potentially to some other area, because we really don't want students to have to read a passage, answer one item, and then have to read another passage and then answer one item. We want to make sure that when they answer or read a passage, that they answer a couple of items at the very least before they have to read another passage, because otherwise the test will take just way too long and those types of things. So you're going to see some pattern about that. And I don't know, Melinda, we haven't set a minimum number of items, have we? Or did we have that for this? Or
For the simulation, we set 4 as the minimum for passage, and that can be adjusted. That's just a departmental decision, but that's what we set for these simulations.
yeah, and we've done some of that with the current NSCAS engine as well to try to make sure there wasn't that type of one and then to another large passage or whatever.
This related question, does map growth have any type of similar constraint on a minimum number of items in an item set with a passage? Or are those just individual standalone items?
I believe that they're more standalone in map growth.
They are standalone. They're not necessarily sets. They aren't sets.
The map growth has their standalones, and then there is one passage with 3 items that will go through the passage. So it is a little bit different, but it does have that section where you've got that more close reading section of it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and the reason I asked for that is because Cindy and Linda too, I think, have pointed out that because a lot of the districts are using map growth, that if the look and feel or some of this is like dramatically different from what they've experienced, it could I don't know, just create anxiety or stress or whatever. And so knowing that there is an item set within map growth that uses a minimum of 3 items, then Jeremy, from a policy, I think 3 to 4 sounds like a nice minimum constraint on something like this for kind of the psychological reasons you gave of, if you're going to read a passage, you want the student to make it kind of be worth their while to have spent time with that.
Yeah, and we've been keeping a pretty close eye on those numbers because we don't want them just to only hit the minimum all the time as far as that goes. So even though there might be a minimum of 4, you know, it's better often if we can get more information out of each passage, because it in general, it makes it so, one, we don't have to have as big of a pool, but it's better for the students as well, and better for the logistics and scheduling and those types of things too. So we can continue to keep an eye on that, and we can adjust that as we go. So
we can also set the max number of passages too, so that they can only have so many passages that a student is expected to see.
Right.
Yes.
Is the test timed?
It is not timed, no.
Okay, so that's good, because
Yeah. One of the benefits of adding the app growth item bank is that there's going to be more flexibility, you know, so we can pick up a single item at the end or whatever the case may be. So it's going to add a lot more flexibility to our current item bank, because the current NSCAS item bank, we're all made up of passages for the most part. We have some newer writing items that are single item, but even those have quite a bit of reading associated with them. And so we're trying to balance all of those pieces out for the students, but the individual tests will definitely have a lot more flexibility when we add those 2 item banks together.
Jeremy, I have a question. I don't even know if this is the right place, and I'm a little scared to ask it because I think it's going to show my level of ignorance. But the last time we talked about ceilings and floors,
Yeah,
in comparison with map growth. And I've got some parents who keep little folders with all their kids' scores for year and year after year, and they look at them. And I think I understand the implication of a ceiling on a percentile rank. If 10 kids out of 100 get it right, I think all those 10 kids got 99th percentile. What I don't know is the implication on a RIT score. What does a ceiling or a floor do to a RIT score? And I just am envisioning something which may be completely off the mark, and you can throw me out if it is. The parent who sees their student high percentile rank, but lower RIT scores. But again, I don't really know how a ceiling impacts a RIT score.
I'm gonna beg off of that one, because it
may be a bad,
you know, and so what I'll say is that we'll keep an eye on it, but Melinda might have a better answer, or somebody else might have a better answer. Then we'll keep an eye on it. So
I think it's kind of preliminary at this point, but it's something to take a look at. Certainly we plan in winter to compare, and we'll do it also in spring, but to compare those scores that students receive against their map growth scores, and see what those linked RITs look like in relation to map growth, and how, and do we cover all of the score range?
And what is the implication of a ceiling on a RIT score? Does it function in the same way as a percentile rank, or no?
So in the map bank, there are 2 banks. There is a grade 3 through 5 bank, and then a 6 and above. So you do have ceilings in math, but so it's the highest scores that are then rank ordered with the cumulative frequency distribution, and then that is used to develop the percentile. So the construction of the item banks are a little bit different that way, but this model is kind of bringing in that map flavor by bringing in items from, you know, if you're in grade 4, that you're going to be seeing 3 and 5.
Thanks for humoring me on that question.
But I think it's a good question, Cindy. We want to be very cognizant of the changes and how they impact the current users of map growth and those scores and everything. So we don't, I mean, not that we want everything to be driven by perception, but perception's important, because we want people to have faith in the scores that they're getting, and not to create all kinds of misunderstandings with the data. There's no benefit to anybody that if we cause confusion and concern and those types of things. It's these things would be really hard to explain to most parents. And so, if we can avoid getting into to bad places with those pieces, it's important to do. And as always, communication is always important, no matter what the change is. So I appreciate you asking those questions very much so, because I think it's something for us to always keep in our minds as we're making decisions about all of the pieces of the system.
Okay, so as we talked about in the last meeting, we decided that we would calculate what the scores might look like from the winter pilot, because we do intend in winter to provide an NSCAS scale score as well as a RIT score. And so I'm going to talk about how we calculated that from the simulations and what that kind of looks like at this point. So for the simulation, and there's a lot of words on this page, but I'll talk through them. So for the NSCAS scale score, we calculated it using the updated theta value at item 27. So remember, item 27 is intended to represent the on-grade blueprint. That's supposed to be the end of the on-grade blueprint. Now we know we're not matching the blueprint at this point, but that's item 27 is supposed to be the on-grade blueprint. So we use that theta value to calculate the NSCAS scale score, as we do for every administration, using the slope and intercept appropriate for the content area. So that's how I got the NSCAS scale score that I'm going to show you in a minute. The RIT score, we calculated using the 40th on-grade item, so all 40 items. We use that theta value at the end of 40, and then I had to run it through NSCAS for the lookup table. So I calculated an NSCAS like scale score. I'm calling it like because it's not all, it's on and off grade, right? So an NSCAS like scale score, and then I used a lookup table to calculate the linked RIT. Keep in mind, this is not the plan going forward. Our plan is to calculate the RIT directly. That's what we've been working toward with the linking study, but this is how I got to the RIT I'm going to show you in a minute, is using the lookup table from the equipercentile equating to MAP that was done last year. Question about my method here? It is a little troubling, I'm sure. I tried. Okay, so here's what it looks like. Here's ELA, grade 4, 5, and 6. So I have the on grade, and these are the students. I was just showing you the spread of those students of how they took the test and what they did. Those same students are the ones I used to calculate these scores. I use those class samples of about 18 students per class. So I have these on grade 27 item NSCAS score, and then over here I have their linked RIT score. Based to those, it looks like I have something backwards here at the bottom. That must be a sorting error on my part. So here's 5th grade. Yeah, I thought these were sorted correctly earlier. So I don't know what happened. So here's 5th grade, and then 6th grade. And here's what they look like for MAP. One thing you will notice is that there are many to one with RIT. There's going to be multiple RIT that goes to a multiple NSCAS. These are different, right? There's 27 items versus 40 items, but that's going to be the case. And the NSCAS scale has many more points in it than the RIT scale does. And so I have a lot more score points and a very few score points, and there's always going to be that kind of comparison. But ultimately, the goal is to be able to calculate this RIT score directly rather than do the lookup that I was doing. So this is kind of what this would look like.
And again, this is based on only NSCAS items, not having map growth items in there.
Exactly.
So it's until we put those in there, we won't be able to. I mean, that linking study will, theoretically allow us to do that direct piece. So that's really important.
So thoughts from anyone?
I'm sorry, can you explain again why you're only using the 27 items for one and then the 40 items for the other?
So the 27 items are matching the blueprint. So this is the NSCAS, only NSCAS items matching the blueprint to give us an on-grade score comparable to their NSCAS score they get now, because they're all on grade matching the blueprint. This, all 40 items then includes on and off grade. So this data gets updated after a student goes off grade. Maybe they saw a 3rd grade item, they come back to a 4th grade, maybe they go to a 5th grade. So this grit is calculated as a grit score would be, with all grades included in the score.
I think another way to think of that is the 27 items are the on-grade blueprint, so that's the accountability system score.
Right.
And then you've got the next phase of the blueprint that shifts. It's also possible to calculate the NSCAS like or predicted score. And so that's where Melinda is taking that predicted score and then computing the equipercentile for the RIT.
Right.
So, and that's something to get your feedback on as well.
It is, yeah. So I think this score, this NSCAS accountability measure, of course, we're not doing accountability in winter, but this would be something that could be used potentially to predict or project maybe what you might be able to do in spring based on where you are with this.
Do you know what the correlation is between the ability estimate with the 27 items and the ability estimate with the 40 items?
I do not off the top. And I know I'm just trying to think if we calculated that. If I could, I don't think that we calculated those two.
Okay.
They're pretty close if I remember correctly, but I mean, there's going to be some changes, right? Because you're having more content. So you may have harder content and you have lower content. They might get a lot of 3rd grade items right. So it's going to change a little bit, but I don't recall it being very different.
Okay.
But I didn't do that. That's something I could calculate.
Well, I was just curious, and I can tell you where I'm coming from. It's the idea that if you give more items, then that estimate of the ability should just be more reliable. And so even though that you're going off grade, maybe for some of them you may actually be on grade, and then with some of them, whenever you go off grade, the difficulty of those items, which are all kind of calibrated on the same scale, should be close to that person's theta. And so I understand the blueprint's not the same, but I'm kind of weighing the two, I think is what I'm struggling with. Now, I understand also the blueprint goes into the accountability and that sort of thing.
Right.
But I was just kind of curious how different they were.
Yeah, I think that's what we were thinking about in terms of accountability and wanting to be able to track where a student is on accountability from fall, winter, into spring, that we wanted to use the first 27. But if there's another way we should be thinking about that.
So were you asking about the final theta to the true theta to final theta correlation between all 40 versus the 27?
Well, I guess actually it would be, there's 3 correlations floating out there. So it would be the correlation of true with the first 27, true with the 40, and then the correlation between the 27 and the 40. I was just kind of generally curious. And my background's more of the psychometrics. And so when we start to drift over into the accountability and stuff, it gets harder for me to say with certainty. But a Roche model would suggest that just as you have more items, as long as the item parameters are all on the same scale, as you have more items, it will be a more reliable measure of that ability. And so I was just kind of curious, it may also be like really nitpicky in the sense that there may not be that big of a difference anyways, in which case then you'd really rely on kind of face validity and the blueprint and that sort of thing.
Yeah, one of the things to consider, I think, for us is that the federal law says that we're supposed to report for accountability purposes and reporting purposes on grade level standards, right? And so one thing that we can do, we've talked about doing, is looking at all items that are at grade level to determine that score, that NSCAS score, which would be something different than using all 40 items potentially if there's off grade level items. And so there could be some differences there as well. Technically, and I don't know that I want to bring this up, but technically you could even look at using, since there's multiple administrations, you could look at using multiple items over the entire year. Of course, there's some differences in that because you could think about weighting the end of the year differently than the beginning of the year and all of those types of things. So there could be a lot of nuances and complications to the whole thing as well.
So, what are some other suggestions? We can take a look at those correlations. I imagine the correlations will be pretty high. We can run those. At that, what are the kinds of things would the TAC suggest that we look at to update this model for winter? And what are your thoughts about it as a basis moving forward?
I think my sense is, as a basis, it is a good start. And I think as long as people are able to make that connection between, I'm thinking about these type A parents that Cindy's dealing with that keep the test files. If they're able to make that sort of connection between the map growth that they're already very familiar with and a system that is reasonably linked to that here, then I think you'd be able to make that sort of transition. I think, though, I guess, and Jeremy, policy wise, in terms of launching next year, what sort of flexibility do you have to be able to kind of use next year still? I mean, is it, and we're calling it a winter pilot, but how fixed do you think people are going to interpret that? Like, will you be able to tweak it if you discover something with larger samples, full item bank, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. We believe we're able to tweak it and modify as we learn and go. I would say there's even the possibility of taking the spring results and still making modifications as we move into full implementation in 22, 23. We'd want to be very careful about any large changes, but minor tweaks to the constraint engine, I think, are very much within our realm of possibility to make those types of things. In next spring, we'll be able to determine that NSCAS score and therefore get an accountability or a proficiency, an achievement level for every student and be able to report that. At the end of the 22-23 year, when we have multiple administrations, it is likely we'll do another standard setting at the end of that year, and then be able to look at all the different ways that we incorporate information in determining that final proficiency. So that should help, I think, to answer that question. I don't know if it causes other questions or not, but.
No, but I think that the other comment, I think what Bob was asking for in terms of additional analysis is useful, because if so again, I'm thinking from an accountability standpoint, if there's a strong relationship between the 27 item score, the 40 item score, then my sense is, because a lot of the accountability system is based on student classifications, you'll likely get smaller standard errors around those classification consistency values. And so you may have greater confidence in where that is if you're able to use the 40 item, recognizing that some of those go out of grade. And so you may have to, I'm like debating with myself as to what is the risk of a student changing a category. But I think the point is they don't go into the diagnostic until you've already made a decision for them at the 27 item. So if anything, all you're doing is helping to have a greater sense of confidence as to where they are. So from a reporting standpoint, I don't know. I don't think you'd lose anything by using all 40, all 40 items to make that final determination of score, because the classification decision's likely already been made, but with the full complement of items, you may just have greater confidence in doing so.
Yeah, and would be able to look at if there's any movement out of category, right? If it just gives us more precision, then and it doesn't change categories for the most part, then it shouldn't be an issue. I think the other thing about accountability that it's good to keep in mind is that the growth and how growth is measured can be very different in the accountability system. Besides determining proficiency, there's lots more room for how you do growth and how we calculate growth in the accountability system. There's a lot more flexibility there, definitely, than there is about proficiency. So that's another thing that can be opened up and expanded to look at possibly additional items for that growth piece, and how we determine growth too, obviously. So, but that's fair point. Thank you.
And what about when you're using all 40 items, remind me, is the blueprint maintained at the student level?
No, they can go outside of that blueprint, because
Yeah,
the blueprint's only at grade level. So when they start going outside of that, it could go well beyond that blueprint.
Yeah, so that's where you might run into some problem with
Peer review.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Although in general, the idea that using more information to get a more accurate score, it is one that we're not unwilling to make with the U.S. Department of Ed, because having more evidence and greater reliability, less error in general shouldn't be considered a bad thing. But those arguments with I don't want to say arguments, the making an argument, not having an argument, might be an interesting process with that peer review set. So, but we're willing to kind of go in new directions and see what happens.
Yeah, so in some ways it'll be a philosophical argument with them more than a psychometric argument.
Right, because we could say, well, we can do it either way, but this is why we think this is better, and get into that philosophical point. Absolutely.
But the classification will always be based on grade level items. So you wouldn't ever be in a position where the only way for a student to be college and career ready is if they were performing well on off grade level.
Yeah, absolutely. That would not be okay at all, right? So that would be, would agree with that.
Well, that seems to be then how you make the argument to USED, is that because decisions are made on grade, and that's why I think monitoring the potential for a student moving categories in the last 13 items is important. So if they move from proficient to advanced, let's say, then that could be problematic. That could be problematic from an accountability standpoint.
Right.
But it doesn't change kind of the met, not met type of decision, though.
Right.
Okay.
So it sounds like what needs to happen in a follow-up is we need to look at the scale scores for the first 27 items and say, okay, here's the scale scores and the cuts. And then the scale scores for the total 40 item test. And then compute the percent of kids that stay in the same category or change, recognizing that there's probably going to be some kids shifting categories because you're going to have more reliability and precision with the 40 items than the 30 or the 27, but we'll at least have a very strong reliability with the 27 that's no different than the precision that we typically see on an end of year summative anyways.
Yeah. And we can do that with the simulation data that we already have for these grades currently. I think we'd want to re-examine it after we run this in the full CBE, where we're getting better matching on the blueprint to see how it looks. Any other thoughts or questions, things we should do? All right, well, that concludes all that I have then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Melinda. Any other thoughts or comments from the TAC related to our first topic?
I guess I am still having some questions. It sounds like you're talking about potentially, am I wrong about this? Potentially basing the scale score and the RIT on all 40 items, but the classification only on the first 27. What score then, like teachers are looking at, they know the score range they have to hit. What scores then would be associated with the classification decisions if you did that? Or would there be 2 scale scores? One for the first 27 and one for the full 40?
There are going to be 2 different scale scores, I think.
Yeah, I think we probably need to just show what that table would look like and show that to you so that you can take a look and see what you think. I mean, I think we just need to run those numbers and take a look at it.
Well, and I definitely think if it moves students off of, if those additional items move students out of categories and those types of things, then decisions would have to potentially be made differently if that was happening. So I think transparency in that is probably just really important as far as that goes, so that people understand what one in general, right? Always that's the philosophy of when we're making determinations about proficiency, how we determine that proficiency is really important, that it's transparent in the way that we do it. There shouldn't be any secrets or hidden pieces under that. I think looking at different ways to do that with more evidence, less error is one of the benefits of this system. And so as we continue to investigate that, we'll have to be transparent as we make decisions around that and bring those forward for others to look at.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I think that idea of showing what the score report would look like that a parent would get, or the school.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah, and we're working on lots of different of the reporting pieces around this. We're trying to make sure that we're considering how the current map growth information is coming to teachers and to parents and to students right now, and trying to make sure that there's some consistency and some familiarity there, but also trying on how to improve those pieces, since we have in some areas, like on grade level, we'll have better data than what map growth has. And so NWA has been working for quite some time now, looking at feedback around reporting and those types of things. It's something that we could bring in the future. I'm not sure what meeting that would be, but definitely we could bring those forward too, because we're definitely working on how to maintain and enhance that information.
All right, good. Well, Jeremy, let's go ahead and move on into our next topic, the item difficulty modeling. And let's see, who is planning to lead that?
Me. Hi.
Yeah, I think Jing is. And actually, I'm just going to turn it right over to her, because I think she can explain this way better than I can. As actually most things, Jing can probably explain better than I can. So go ahead, Jing.
Okay, let me share my screen first.
Yep.
So do you see the slides?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, great. This is an item difficulty modeling study for the Nebraska ELA reading items. Last time we present the item difficulty modeling for math items. We applied the same method for the ELA items because ELA items have different item features, and we want to see like how these item features can works to predict the difficulty of ELA reading items, and do the features affect item difficulty in similar ways or in different ways. So that's the main idea about this study. Then item difficulty modeling has a long history in assessment literature, and researchers like Ferrara et al., they conducted a literature review for the IDM studies, and they reviewed 24 studies and identified 5 main response demand categories that contribute to item difficulty. And these categories are cognitive demand of the item, like the depth of knowledge that an item measures, the stimulus demand, like the passage length or passage readability, the item design demand, like the item type, content demand, like the standard that an item measures, and finally is the linguistic demand, the vocabulary level, sentence length of the item. So these are the big categories, item response demand categories that contribute to item difficulty. Based on the literature, we use some item features that fall into these categories to build the item difficulty model, try to predict the difficulty of ELA reading items. Compared to previous studies, we think that this study has some benefits, and compared to previous studies, we introduced range ALD as a new predictor, and range ALD, the range ALD level of item was not used in previous item difficulty modeling studies. Because range ALD reflect the cognitive demand of an item with the learning trajectory of the measurement target. So if there's a significant relationship between range ALD level and item difficulty, it will show the validity evidence of the range ALD level, and can verify the learning trajectory for the measurement construct. A certain benefit is because previously there's very sparse research on how text complexity impact item difficulty. Some studies find that there's no impact, and some studies find there's small impact. So there's no consensus. And we often use text complexity, the complexity of the passage to select passage to design items. So we want to understand whether how text complexity really affect item difficulty for us to better design, better select passage, design items. And another third benefit is we want to improve our understanding about what makes an item easy or difficult. And this can help us develop items at the targeted level, and then increase the effectiveness of item writing and reduce the cost with item writing. Finally, it will help us identify construct irrelevant source of variance and improve the validity of the items. So that's then our general goal is to apply several approaches of item difficulty modeling to predict the difficulty of ELA reading items and to validate series of learning. So we want to understand how the item features impact the difficulty of reading items. In particular, we want to see whether range ALD is a significant predictor, and how text complexity influence the item difficulty. And we also apply several models and want to find out the best model that works for modeling the difficulty of ELA reading items. So that's the general purpose. Okay, so then I will talk about the method of this study. The data we used is from the Nebraska ELA summative assessment. We included about 2,800 ELA items. Then the item features, we used the range ALD, DOK, the target grade level, target standard, item type, and some passage complexity, text complexity features. These tables are just some descriptives of the item features, like the proportion of items at each range ALD level, DOK level. As you can see here, we don't have a lot of items at the highest range ALD or DOT level. Then for the standard at item measures. So among these around 3,000 items, they target at 79 standard, and those standards can be classified into 2 big domains: reading vocabulary and reading comprehension. Then for the item type, the majority of the items are multiple choice item, and there's some choice multiple and depth match item. So only a small proportion of the item are polytomous, and the majority are dichotomous item.
Jane,
Then,
how was the range ALD and the DOK determined originally?
I think it's the content specialist. They told the range ALD and DOK.
This was previously established to the study. It wasn't part of the study to actually identify and match the range ALD, or was it?
It's not part of this study. It was either in the item development process. The item writers assign the DOK range ALD levels, and I believe there's a special alignment study that those content specialists assign the range ALD and DOT levels to the items.
Okay,
That's correct. Yep.
So sorry. Then for the passage text complexities, so items are associated with passages. Those items come from about 300 passages, and we look at the passage complexity scores. We used 3 features to reflect the passage complexity, text complexity: the Lexile score, flash content grade level score, and passage length. So passage length is measured by number of words. For Lexile, it is analyzed by the Metametrics Lexile analyzer. For flash content and number of words, we use the natural language processing tools to generate those, calculate those scores. And you can see the distribution of those 3 features for all these about 300 passages. Generally, the distributions look good to us, but for Lexile, we see a little bit bimodal distribution for the Lexile score. And we believe the passage Lexile score should continuously distributed on the scale. So this may indicate the distribution of the passage Lexile score is not ideal. So we take a closer look at the passage Lexile scores. And this is a table shows you the descriptive statistics about the passage Lexile scores. As you can see, the mean and the median of the passage at each grade level or increase. As the grade level increase, the mean and the median of the Lexile score increase. But for mean, minimum and maximum, it do not clearly increase as the grade level increase. There's some they are not vertically articulated, very well vertically articulated. Like this box plot shows, for example, at 7th grade level, the lower fence is not higher than the low fence of the 6th grade. So here it's probably the distribution is not ideal. So we also compared the Lexile range at each grade level with the CCSS recommended Lexile range at each grade band. So here, for example, we find the range of the Lexile at each grade band is wider than the range of the wider than the Lexile range recommended by CCSS. So for example, here it's 520 to 1,300, but the CCSS recommended range is narrow. So these are some we take some.
And can you hold on for a second? I think Jeremy was wanting to ask a question.
Yeah, what is CCSS? I should probably know that.
The Common Core State Standard.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And we should really say that it says Common Core. It's really the college readiness that Metametrics puts out in terms of their recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is we took a lot of the Lexile stores, the passage text complexity features, and item features. So these then we use these features to build the item difficulty models. So the dependent variable is the item difficulty parameter, and then the independent variables are these item features. And we use the 4 models. First is the most widely used ordinary least square linear regression model. Then I also used the 3 other machine learning models, and these are also pretty widely used machine learning models. We include multiple models because one model may work well for some cases, but not for others. By comparing those models, we try to find a model that works best for our specific data set. So for the item difficulty modeling process, first, the reading items were randomly split into a training data set and a validation data set. The training data set is used to train the model, and the validation data set is used to evaluate the model. Then the random splitting process was repeated 10 times, and the final results were the average from those 10 validation data sets. For the machine learning models, each machine learning models have some hyperparameters, and we tune the hyperparameters to achieve best prediction possible. So the parameters were tuned through a grid search to improve the model prediction. Now I'm going to show you the results from the model building from all the models. First, we just take a look of the relationship between the dependent variable and the independent variable. Is there a good relationship between them so that those independent variables make sense to be included in the model to predict item difficulty? So this table shows you the correlation between the dependent variables and independent variables. So as you can see, the item difficulty have like a weak to moderate correlation with these independent variables. And this suggests that these probably are promising parameters to be included in the model. We also find some other patterns, like here we see a high correlation between the flash truncated score and the Lexile score. So this is expected as they both measure text complexity. And the flash truncated Lexile, they have a high correlation with grade level. And this is also expected because we use these readability measures when we design items at different grade levels. Then some other interesting pattern is we find range ALD and DOT have almost close to zero correlation with these tax complexity measures. And because these are related to difficulty, but they are not related to these tax complexity measure. So this indicates that range ALD, DOT, they provide some explanation of item difficulty that are independent of the tax complexities. So these are general look about this relationship between difficulty and item features. Then one of our question is whether range ALD is a good predictor of item difficulty. So the correlation is 0.39, and the bus plot shows that as range ALD level increase, the item difficulty also increase. So this indicated range ALD might be a good predictor of item difficulty.
Jean?
Yeah,
sorry. Could you go back to that for just a moment?
Sure.
So so as a predictor using the range ALD and item difficulty, 0.39 to me doesn't sound like a really strong predictor in terms of explained variance. And so could you talk about your interpretation of that a little bit? And I know you might be getting to that in the next slide or two, but I saw that kind of in the advanced materials and was curious about the interpretation of those data as well as then the use of it. So could you, what sort of threshold are you using for, good versus moderate versus strong relationship here? Do you have a particular threshold that you're thinking about, or?
Yeah, I think that based on the IDM literature, item difficulty modeling literature, like the R square explained by the item features, we see a wide range of R square, like from 0.1 to 0.8. So with then the item the range LD, the correlation point of around 0.4. I think as an individual predictor, it explains it's a certain amount of the variance observed in the item difficulty already. So that's why I think this is a promising predictor.
I'll let you. Yeah, I'll let you.
Criteria in mind about what is a good predictor?
Yeah, well, something higher, I guess. I mean, explaining 16% of the variance seems modest in terms of the predictive. And so if it is, if this is kind of the incremental added value of a predictor, and that there are other indicators and that this is adding value beyond what other predictive elements are, but as a standalone predictor, it doesn't seem that strong to me.
Yeah.
But I recognize that this is a somewhat, well, it's not that new of an area, I guess, but I don't know. I saw the interpretation of it being a good indicator, and I thought that seemed optimistic, I guess.
Yeah, and I had the same reaction to this, and I don't know, with the multiple regression, are we going to see the total, as you put all of these things together, we'll see what the overall prediction, what the overall R squared looks like, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's good enough, I think, really depends on what you're going to do with the data.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you're going to do, to what extent, if this model is used to help write items, it might be, it's not a high stakes situation. It's going to inform it. It won't be the only thing that informs it. So it could be useful.
Yeah, it's get some information about item difficulty before you collect any field test data. So roughly what's the difficulty of the item would be.
Well, I mean, one thing, we're probably jumping ahead, but the item types seem to have some influence here as well.
Yes.
So if you're looking to be able to differentiate student performance at the higher performance levels, being able to introduce items beyond multiple choice items seem to be important, because some of the TEIs tended to be more difficult. Now, why are they more difficult is another question, I think. Were they just more difficult because students weren't familiar with them, but really knew the content? Or what is it about a TEI that makes it more difficult? Is it because it's more constructed response and students can't select? So it's more authentic in a way. I don't know. I don't want to get beyond your presentation.
In the literature, and particularly in Steve Ferrara's and Jeff Steedle's work, what you see is that the more steps that are required in solving a problem, then you see greater difficulty. And so the TEI items really help with that more greater steps. And I do think that you are getting some truncation in this, in the sense of because when we look at the percentage of items of the that are at the higher levels of DOK and that are at the higher levels of
and it goes back to what
ALD.
And it really goes back to what the standard is calling for.
Right.
So, if the standard is calling for, doing multiple things or whatever, multi-step processes, then you need those kind of items and they'll be more difficult. So, and I guess the range ALDs kind of are based on the standards to a large degree, right?
The range ALDs are intended to be based on the standards, but they're intended to also talk about the intersections that are happening with students between what it is they're asked to do for a task and how the author is setting up those moments in the text for a student to either retrieve a detail from the text, to provide an interpretation, or to conduct an analysis. And so it's really meant to, one of my favorite things to do is to take different pieces of text and say, oh, look at this example right here. This is an author setting up this scenario, and you can see that this is going to be like this level of item because, for example, the author has used a context clue and then in parentheses given you the synonym, or the context clue is a synonym somewhere else in that paragraph. And you'll see those kinds of nuances really in different passages. And so then it becomes a progression of when is the child able to demonstrate that skill combined with what's happening in the passage for the student to interact with. That's the intent of the range ALDs.
Okay.
So I'll continue to talk about results from those 4 models. So we use 3 evaluation matrix to evaluate the models, the mean square error, mean absolute error, and the R-square. Mean square error is the mean of average of the squared difference between the predicted value and actual value. MAE is the average of the absolute difference between the predicted value and the actual value. So these evaluation matrix for the first 2, the smaller the better the model, and for R-squared the bigger the better the model. And they tell a pretty consistent story for which model is performing better. And the model performance range from high to low are random forest, linear regression, SVM, and k-nearest neighbor. So compared to the linear regression, random forest improved R-square slightly. So so if we want to optimize the prediction of model, random forest is a better choice. But the advantage of the linear regression model is its simplicity and the easiness of interpretation of the results. So we can see how the item features are affecting the item difficulty more clearly. Because we think it's important to understand how the predictors are affecting the dependent variable, and that will provide meaningful feedback to item writers and provide instructionally useful feedback to teachers. Linear regression might be a good choice for our case. And we examined whether the data meet the linear regression model assumptions. Like, is there a linear relationship between the dependent variables and the independent variable? Like the scatter plot shows there's a linear relationship between the predicted value and the actual value. And the residual plot shows the residuals are randomly distributed. And so all the data kind of meet the assumptions of linear regression model. So, and then we look at the item features, how these features make the item easy or difficult. So this is a coefficient table of the independent variables. Then it shows you which feature is significant, like range LD, DOK, item type, lifestyle score, number of words. These are the significant predictors. So and there are also some standards and passages that are significantly more difficult or significantly easier than other standards passages, but because there are too many, I didn't include them here.
Jane, how do you explain the fact that the difficulty of the passage, the Lexile level, isn't correlated with item difficulty? Is it because people are writing easier items when the passages are more difficult? I mean, you know, you would think on its face, you would think that items that are associated with more difficult passages would be harder.
Yes, and
So
that's the pattern it is showing here. Like the coefficient is positive, and you may think the number here is very small, but the Lexile is on a range like between 0 to 1,500. So if the Lexile score increase 100 points, then the item difficulty on average, it will increase like 0.12. So it affects item difficulty to some extent. So it still plays a role in item difficulty.
I'm just saying you would guess it would play a larger role than it appears to be playing, right?
Yeah, so I think item difficulty, it's not, it's influenced by the passage difficulty, but also influenced by many other factors like the students' interaction with the passage, with the item. They need to find out the information from the passage, like where the information located, and so those kind of the interaction kind of determine the item difficulty more directly. So that's probably explain why the passage difficulty didn't play a bigger role as expected.
So I kind of want to give a little context for this as well, and that is there is a debate in the reading community about the role of text complexity in reading comprehension versus the role of the task of making inferences and conducting analyses. And NAEP has looked at this. Park looked at this as well and built these cognitive models. And so what you will oftentimes see is that within a passage, you will have items that will target students in different levels of reading development. So a single passage can support a child that's in more novice stages of reading versus a child that's more sophisticated. And so you're really kind of seeing there is a camp that is very adamant that increases in text complexity are what drives the reading comprehension. And then there is a camp that says, no, it's really more of a cognitive processing and an interaction with the student. And that's where you get those qualitative models of text complexity. What we're seeing here that I find interesting is that the grade level is not driving difficulty, but the lexile and the number of words are. And so Jing took out the text complexity measures and ran a model. And at that point, grade became a predictor and text complexity when text complexity was not there. And so when you look at the impact of that coefficient on 100 points on the lexile scale, then you begin to see as a passage is, say, from a 400 to a 600 or a 600 to an 800, then you start seeing larger influences of the text complexity measure. And I would typically say it's a proxy for text complexity, because it's certainly these formulas are not at all capturing all of the pieces of text complexity. Then you do see a larger impact on the item parameters.
Thank you.
Sorry, before moving on from that, within these models, so one of the things within these models that I have questioned and wondered why it's missing in most of what I've seen is the focus seems to be on the elements that you've described. So the text complexity, and sometimes even like the type of text, whether it is literary, informational, if it tended to be allegorical, poems, other sorts of kind of features of the text. And similar to what Christy, you were saying with some of the discussions that are going on, like linguists really get deep into the text, the text is why something's difficult or not, without considering the interaction with the task. But then the additional element that I don't think is modeled or discussed as much is then the plausibility for multiple choice items, the plausibility of the distractors, because the more difficult passage could ask a literal comprehension question where a student could write in to draw from.
That's right.
Have a really simple passage that's inferential, and depending on the distinctions I need to make among the distractors, that I don't know, that to me seems it seems like we're missing a key piece of the item being the collection of all the information associated with it. So I don't know what you've seen in the literature on that, or how that is, because that's something I think that is missing in some of these IDM things that we've talked about.
So I'm sure Jeremy has very strong opinions also coming from the English language arts background. So you are exactly right, Chad. In the literature, the distractors and the complexity of the stem are also difficulty drivers. And so one of the things that Jing and I have talked about is running the stems and looking at the complexity of the stem. But I am really, and this is just me and my perspective, so you can get a very difficult passage and get a very literal retrieval question, which is why it's easy, which is why we don't always want to say text complexity drives item difficulty, because it's really that moment and what we ask the kid. That's that task that you talked about. My personal struggle is that I want range ALDs to be exemplifying what's happening in authentic experiences and not exemplifying just what's in a multiple choice test. So I really struggle with the literature which talks about that looking at the distractors, and you can really do a better prediction. But I'm trying to figure out, I guess, and Jing and I have had some of these discussions, and we've talked to some of the folks that have been doing this research with NAEP as well. If we're interested in really understanding the cognitive processes of reading, then I'm really I'm very philosophically opposed to trying to put the distractors in there just to amp up the prediction of the particular model for multiple choice items.
What metric would you use? I mean, the DOK and the range ALD is somewhat of a proxy, I think, for the question, for the STEM and the distractors, I guess. I mean, what else? Because what else could you use?
Well, we will, I think, looking at the complexity of the tasks, so the STEM, I think is good. I'd actually like to get better, quite honestly, at writing the range ALDs. What this study has done is really helped me figure out how I want to change writing the range ALDs. The other thing that I would like is when we have more constructed response items, when we get to that place, I think you're going to also see writing and being able to get the kids and parse the text, because Jing is so magical. She can do that too. And that is really be able to, then you can start seeing what happens. And one of the things that we've been doing lately is having kids take 2 passages and do the authentic task and read and write. And once the kids can do that and you go back to a multiple choice item, you realize that there's also a lot of scaffolding there. So I'm really just personally interested in looking at and growing to get this into a model where we're looking at it authentically. But that's down the road.
Yeah, and I maybe to challenge that mildly is that students at different ability levels are going to interact with a passage at a different level. And if we're talking about building out item sets so that passages would have multiple items associated with it, I think it, in order to try to challenge students at different levels, the different approaches to how students at different levels would interact with passages that honestly are a very authentic experience. If I read something by like Wim van der Linden, I do not access it at the same level as he writes it. And that's okay, I think. But
I love that, Chad, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. And so I'm a big fan of Sheila Valencia out of the University of Washington, and then Karen Wixon, their work and their models, because they talk about the task, the text complexity, and the reader. And we can't model the reader. Maybe we can through some engagement statistics and looking at if they're interested in the passage or not. But we can model the other parts of complexity. But I don't disagree, and it does not bother me at all for you to push away. This is, I think, how we all learn and grow together.
Great, thanks, Christy. I know Jing is desperate to finish her presentation, so we're gonna move forward.
I have just one tiny comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
About the table. I think if you had some kind of measure of effect size, like a proportion of variance explained or something like that in that table, then it would be a lot easier to talk about kind of the importance, relative importance, above and beyond significance. And so that might be a way to just kind of, because part of me kind of looks at that and I'm like, okay, well, lexile and number of words, but I don't know which one's kind of in some way more important.
Mhm.
And just adding like an effect size or something to that can help with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I know like random forest review the relative importance of the features, and yeah, that's something, yeah, I plan to add. So then the summaries is the model predict the difficulty to some extent, and they give us some support. This model support that these item features can be used in combination to better understand where an item is likely to be on the IRT scale. A linear regression model is appropriate for modeling the difficulty of these reading items. And these are how the independent variable item features impact the item difficulty. Then some implications. So first of all, the lexile throughout the passage, we find the lexile range overlap across grade levels and do not match exactly with the Common Core state standard recommended lexile range. So we recommend to re-examine the passage difficulty to see if they align to state's expectations. And these are recommended for the national population, and we may develop a better lexile range that works for Nebraska students. So based on that lexile range, see whether the future developed passage meet the expectations of text complexity. Other implications, like if we want to make item more challenging, we can consider item types other than multiple choice, make items at a higher DOK range LD levels, and use the predict difficulty to as a quality check for the items before the field test of the items, and evaluate the lexile range of future developed passage to see if these passages are grade level appropriate. So our question for TAC is because we find the range LD play a big role in item difficulty, and that's not quite related to text complexity. What are the ways to communicate results to teachers about the value of range LDs? And the second question is, how should the range of text complexity be considered in a ThreeYear system? So that's the two questions. Let me make it bigger.
Thanks, Jing. Yeah, let me open it up for the TAC on this, and particularly Cindy and Linda from the field's perspective, and Jeff too, with your policy leadership experience. If there are ways, and particularly for that first question regarding communication of this.
Well, I would just ask the question, to what extent are teachers and people in schools even using achievement level descriptors? Because my experience is that they don't use them very much. They go to the standards and they're aligning their instruction more to standards than to the ALDs. Now that may not be the case everywhere, but it's some way to help familiarize teachers and others with the ALDs is important, I think.
Yeah, so I'll respond to that as a first pass. And then, so one thing that we're trying to do is make the range ALDs more useful to teachers, right? So as we look at the information that we're providing back, we're trying to make sure that those range ALDs enhance the information and the teachers' understanding of how students might move through those progressions of understanding. And so Christy and others have done a lot of work around the use of ALDs, and we're trying to ensure that we're making those more effective and giving that good information back. So part of the answer is not as much as we want to, and we want to increase that moving forward.
I would agree. I would say teachers look more towards the standard than the range ALDs.
We've tried to get teachers to look more at the range ALDs. And I think a couple things make that more difficult. One is sometimes there's actually a perception that that is teaching to the test, that now you are changing your curriculum so that it is more aligned with the test than the standard. I think the other problem is teachers are experiencing standards overload. There are so many different sets of standards they have to look at that they don't feel they can even keep up with the standards, let alone some other document.
True.
Yeah, and I should also mention probably and follow up. Yes, I agree with both what Linda and Cindy had said there. That makes perfect sense to us. We're also working on a range ALD tool to provide that information back, right? So the map growth uses the learning continuum to provide information back, and so that's one way. This ALD tool is meant to, that we're in drafts of right now, is meant to give that information back in a similar way as the learning continuum. And that would make it more, we think, more useful to teachers as they're looking at that more as a progression of learning as opposed to just teaching to the test or whatever the case may be. So we're trying to make that information more useful and understandable about how it can be leveraged to move students forward as opposed to just a proficiency score or whatever the case may be. If anybody wants to, yeah, Mary, I was just thinking Mary might speak to this better than I do.
Well, and we've done some work. We kind of provided some ALD professional development around how teachers can use the ALDs to take the items they already have and just make some tweaks to kind of help differentiate instruction and things like that. So it's not about having to create a bunch of stuff new for the ALDs, but they can take information they already are using and sort of adapt. So we're trying to kind of find different avenues to make them useful to the educators in the classroom. And we did get positive feedback. And we have a content advisory board that we met with as well. And as long as the educators are aware of it and kind of know where it is and know how to use it, then they do find it really valuable. So I think a big piece of it is really just communicating as much as possible the availability and use of the ALDs.
Right, and that work would play into professional learning opportunities that we would be able to provide and those types of things as we move forward into this new assessment model. So we're trying to coordinate all of those efforts, and this is just one more of those pieces trying to improve the information we give back to teachers on a regular basis.
Now, one thing the teachers do know and like, and I'm not going to use the right phrase, it's not the map growth learning progressions, it's something else that they really use and like. And they are very fearful that the new NSCAS will not have that documentation. And Linda may be able to help me with what those documents are called.
I think it's probably that learning continuum, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
are you talking about the one with the green bars and it shows the different skills at every level? I think that is the learning continuum. I bet you that's what she's referring to.
Yeah, I think so. And that's not going away. We're just looking at ways to even improve that further with the amount of grade level information that we have.
So one of the reports you'll be able to do, like after they take the map growth, the kids' names go into under every category, so you can pull for small group work on who is exactly where.
I don't want to comment on what's going to actually be there because I know we're still working on those pieces, but we understand that that's been very useful to teachers and so that we want to make sure that's still available.
And Linda and Cindy, I think we'll probably need your help in really helping teachers see the difference. Because if we go into some of the ELA pieces in the learning continuum, and you look at the descriptors that are there, those descriptors are the same in some cases across the whole grade level.
Sure.
And so what I want teachers to see is that these are giving you some context about, it's not that a child just is mastered the main idea. It is that the child is able to infer a theme or a main idea when it's not explicitly given, and they had to use information from different parts of the text that were implicit to draw that conclusion. And that's different than a descriptor that says identifies the main idea. And so really where we're trying to go is helping understand what are the cognitive pieces that kids are putting together, because the teacher is doing their best that they can to do everything to show and model. And then what we want to be able to say is, this is actually when the child can do these things, and this is what's happening in their head. That's the dream. I may die not having achieved that dream, but that's where we want to go.
Okay.
Okay. Other comments? Jing, in terms of that second question, did you get enough from how text complexity should be considered in the 3-year system?
Yeah, we are running out of time. So does TAC members still want to continue that, or maybe some written feedback? Maybe you can give us some written feedback about for that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the feedback is that I think, Jing, you actually used a phrase that I use frequently in talking about it, that text complexity influences but doesn't determine difficulty. And I think that, to me, continues to be the right sort of message. And so the extent to which it contributes to modeling good, because I think there's some value in that, particularly as when we transition to our next topic, talking about some embedded standard setting work. The better the models are for predicting item difficulty, the better you can then do some of the predictive work for the embedded standard setting. And so, yes, it should be included. How it should be included, I think, is I don't know that there is consensus on that. So I don't know, Jeff, Bob, Linda, Cindy, thoughts specifically on the text complexity question?
Good.
All right, everybody wants a break, Jing, so you're lucky. All right, great. We do have one more topic to get to. However, I promised Jeremy I would give everybody at least a short break today. So why don't we go ahead and take 15 minutes now and come back around 5 after the hour, and we'll hit our last topic. I don't think we're going to need the full 4 hours today. That was part of the meeting invite. So this last topic, I'm anticipating 30 to 45 minutes. So we should be done by 3 Central Time regardless.
Sounds good.
Right. So we'll see everybody at 2:05 Central Time.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Mhm.
Must be on a break, huh?
Yes, we just went on a break at 2:05.
Good timing. All right. I'll see you in a bit.
Okay,
Thanks, Trudy.
thanks. Bless you.
Allergies in DC. All right. Oh, sorry, Jeff, you're muted. You're muted, Jeff. I can't hear you.
You could hear my cough, sneezing. Okay.
Yeah, then you went on mute.
Oh, I did. Someone put me on mute. I
Oh.
was just asking, do you have cicadas wherever you are?
Yes. So I'm just north of Philadelphia right now.
Okay.
We do. Yeah, we have, they're starting to, actually they have been for like a week or so once it got warm.
Yeah, no, there are lots of them here. And they're just kind of docile, and I was afraid they were going to start eating all our shrubs and things, but they don't seem to be doing that. But there's this incredible hum in the air. You know, just in the background, it's constantly there. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the Russians, right, from the Cuban embassy.
That's right. May not be the cicadas at all, huh?
All right. Okay, so let's, as we move into our last topic for the day, embedded ID matching as embedded standard setting. And Christy, are you going to take lead on this?
I am, but I need to know what you can see, because as is usual, I am having my typical Ring Central. Nope.
So,
Okay.
There you go.
There.
Okay. So
Perfect.
right now, so that you know, I cannot see you. So
It's okay. We can see you, and that's all that's really matters.
okay, so I won't be able to tell if someone's getting ready to ask a question or needs me to pause. So I need people just to jump in and interject.
We'll just interrupt. It'll be good. Chad, I don't see Cindy yet. I don't know if we want to wait a second or.
Yeah, let's give her just a second to come back on this. Although, did she drop entirely?
No, I can see her. I can see her screen.
I can see her office. Yeah.
And Cindy, Christy, you just changed the what we're seeing again.
Okay.
We had just the slide. One more. Okay.
All right. Let me try again.
Okay.
And Christy, sometimes what works for me is when you're in the kind of just like the slide view, and then if you instead of using the drop down from the top, if you use in the lower right hand corner, just clicking on the slideshow, sometimes that tends to work for Zoom.
That's helpful. Okay,
well,
so
you can try.
In the bottom right hand corner of the okay, I see what you're saying.
Of PowerPoint. Yeah. Just a little click that sometimes works for doing kind of like the display stuff.
Spoken like a person with lots of expertise in virtual presentations.
Well, Susan and our staff helped me with that. That is not me.
Okay, share screen. And I've got myself all discombobulated right now. So I don't know why it's not doing it.
Jeremy, I would say let's go ahead and get started, and then Cindy can jump in.
Yeah, and I'm just going to turn it right over to Christy to share information about this embedded approach. So
okay, what can you see?
So if you swap it, then that would be good, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
So it still did. Yeah.
There
So
you go.
Yep.
Okay. So I want to share with you a method of standard setting that Dan Lewis and I have been working on together to see if you have interest in trying this out with the NSCAS science assessment this summer or fall to see how it works. So this is a process that is intended to be an efficient process when used with principled assessment design that combines alignment, the item descriptor matching procedure, which we used for standard setting for the ELA and math assessments, and then embedded standard setting, which is an approach to standard setting that Dan Lewis and Rob Cook developed. And so the idea is really that we are right now, instead of having cognitive tasks that are more difficult for teachers, that instead we center the cognitive task of standard setting really in what teachers have to do every day. And so that's alignment. And so embedded standard setting procedures are really centered in looking at the standard setting process as alignment, really pulling from work that Susan and Chad have done in building a validity framework around alignment that really is based in the standard setting frameworks that we use when we look at how we think about validity. So embedded standard setting really is adhering to a multi-round alignment process, but it maintains the strongest feature of ID matching, which is asking teachers to match items and describe what items are measuring and matching them to the range ALDs. And what happens in ID matching very typically is that in round one, ID matching is very focused on the matching of the item to the descriptors. But then in round two, it switches to really looking at kind of picking a cut score. And so the idea about this process is to really just center the process on the alignment task and let embedded standard setting, that calculation, calculate the cut scores in the background, with the idea that you can come out with really robust alignment data as well as standard setting data. So the item descriptor matching procedure has been described as one of the most promising and underutilized standard setting methods. So we were very excited that we got to implement this in 2018 in Nebraska. It does not require that panelists define a borderline student. It does not require them to estimate the probability that students are answering a particular item correct. Instead, what the ID matching procedure relies on are achievement level descriptors that are well articulated to the content that items are built to and that are representative of the items on the test, and that they really get an in-depth understanding of those achievement level descriptors. So the idea in the ID matching process is that panelists make judgments about the knowledge and skills being measured by the items, and they align the items to the range ALDs. And then this is really the center of the task and what we want teachers to be able to do. There was a really nice EMIP issue that came out on alignment. I think it was earlier this year, and really centering the idea on if teachers are not able to align tasks to achievement level descriptors, and then teachers aren't able to really engage in the alignment process, then it's really difficult then to think that we have valid assessments, and that really our focus needs to be on that alignment task. So where we run into problems with the ID matching procedure is that you have these threshold regions where we want teachers to have items in an ordered item book, very similar to bookmark standard setting in that regard. And they see items that are ordered in difficulty, and we want for the matching to happen where teachers are able to clearly match to, in this example, below basic and then to basic. But what happens in practice is that you get items that you're matching to both descriptors, or another fun thing that happens is that you might have an item that's pretty difficult, but it aligns to a descriptor from a lower achievement level. And so because of that threshold region, then usually what happens in the ID matching procedure is that in round 2, you discuss the items in that threshold region, and you try to resolve where you think that there are discrepancies and talk about them. But then oftentimes what happens is you say, okay, well, given that you have these places where it's inconsistent, where should the cut score page be? So should it be? So almost becomes another standard setting method. It almost integrates with the bookmark method. And so we wanted to really move that shift in the cognitive task out of the process. So what we're hoping then is that if range ALDs, and you've heard me talk about this before, if range ALDs are the linchpin of an assessment's interpretation and use argument, then they should be the epicenter of standard setting as well, and that the development of the achievement level descriptors, if it's done through a panel by the state and you've got consensus and you've gone through feedback processes, then that's really the standard setting process as we know and love it, in terms of really defining what students should know and be able to do. And then if we think about alignment, we have a chain of evidence that links standards or a measurement target to the range ALDs that are the progressions of increasing sophistication. Ideally, then we also we're building the items to the range ALDs, and we're using task models and science in particular. And so you've got this chain of evidence that says we go from this measurement target to these range ALDs, to these task models, to these items. And so there should be a very clear evidence chain. And so with the idea is then that if you are aligning an item to a range ALD in a particular cell, then that should also tell you what the alignment to the standard is as well, because there should be congruence there. And then in the construction of the range ALDs in the framework that Carla and Steve and I worked on, the idea was that DOK was embedded into the range ALD descriptors or whatever the cognitive framework was as well. So this should be in all synergistic, and that you can then, when you're making the matches, you're also doing alignment as well. So taking this conceptualization, then the idea is that, very similar to standard setting, that participants take the test, they review the items, and they define what items measure. And that's oftentimes we do that in an item map, and we ask questions to say, what is this item? Why is it harder than, what does this item measure? Why is it harder than other items? So we want panelists to still make independent judgments, but between the matches of the items in the OIB and the range ALDs, but we also ask them to identify the standard and the cognitive level if that's desired. And what changes is we slightly change those two questions, and we use the more of that range ALD framework, where we're saying, what are the content features? What are the contextual features that are present in the item and synthesized by the student who answers this item correctly? Because as we were just discussing about in reading, a lot of times it's an interaction between the stimulus and the question. And so we want teachers to understand that and be aware of it. And then why is the item more difficult than the preceding items? And then teachers are tagging the range ALD level. And once they identify the range ALD that the item matches, then that tells them what the standard is. And then they can make a DOK judgment if that's what is preferred. So then what happens in round 2 is that rather than discussing items in a threshold region, we're having the alignment discussion where we're really getting feedback on where teachers align the items to in terms of the ALD level, in terms of the standard, and then in terms of the depth of knowledge. And the idea is that in the system that we're working on developing, and it's really exciting, what we have is a way that we can configure the system so that the state defines what the criteria for consensus is. So if it can be 100%, it can be 75%, it can be 67% agreement in terms of alignment. So in this example, we're showing that the alignment criteria is that you've hit success in aligning the items when 75% of the teachers agree that this item is at ALD level 3 for that particular standard, 8.4.1a, and that it's a DOK 1. And so round 2 then is you don't discuss any item that has the required agreement. So you only focus the teachers on the feedback and in the color-coded cells where there's not agreement. And then the panelists can have the discussions that you would typically want panelists to have in terms of aligning the items to the achievement level and to the standards, but then they can use that feedback, the discussion, and the item map to, again, independently match the items to the range ALDs and to the standards and to the DOKs. What changes is that because we want this to be a principled approach, and because we know that range ALDs, when they're developed, are hypotheses about how students increase in knowledge, and then data can show us when we are correct and when items are sometimes more difficult than we expected. Perhaps we've aligned it with level 1 and it's really level 3 or vice versa. So the idea is that in round 3, the ESS process has calculated the cut scores. And so then in round 3, what happens are that the teachers are then investigating cases where the item difficulty and the range ALD matches are discrepant, so that decisions about how to proceed can be made. So the idea is that they can look at the item classifications against the consensus classifications, and in particular, examining the most discrepant items so that they can make decisions. Should the range ALDs be edited? And should we realign to those range ALDs? Or are some of the discrepant items measuring something that we didn't intend, and there's something going on that we pick up, and perhaps we're excluding those items from the assessment, or we're editing them? And so, as with a typical workshop, you are finishing a workshop with an evaluation survey, and that the final output then is you have the cut scores calculated with resolutions in place, which is important because the idea is the more agreement there is among the panelists between the items and the item difficulty, the more precise the cut scores are for the state's expectations of student performance. And then the nice thing is that from the process, then you also have an item alignment summary table that immediately shows you the number of items that are matched to each particular cell and the range ALD level of those items, the standard, and then the depth of knowledge levels, and then the item types. And during this process, then we also have rater agreement statistics that psychometricians can use in the background to say, this looks like it's going pretty well, they're agreeing, or we've got a lot of disagreement. And so maybe in round 2, we're really going to facilitate some discussion around the disagreement. And we should be seeing that the rater agreement statistics are increasing as we go through the rounds. And one of the things that we've learned through the simulation studies that Jing thought of doing, which was really wonderful, is that the empirical distribution of really where these items are aligning to the ALDs very much affects the agreement rates that we see with the raters. So one of the things that we have learned is that we need to kind of make sure that we already know what the item developers have tagged the items as in terms of the range ALD levels, like the intent, because that helps us better understand the rater agreement statistics we should expect. And so then as a part of that process, then you've got all of the alignment pieces, you've got standard setting pieces, and the idea is that you've got 2 processes for the price of 1. And so the question that we have is, what is the perspective of the state and the TAC on piloting the process with either a small number of teachers or NDE subject matter experts in science with the field test items that we're in the middle of calibrating and equating to build test forms to for next year, and seeing where the items fall in comparison to the range ALDs, and then adjusting the range ALDs based on field test data at this point. So I'm going to stop talking, and hopefully we can have a discussion with questions and perspectives.
So it seems that what this method really depends on is that the range ALDs be very comprehensive. And, you don't have tasks on the test that really aren't reflected in the ALDs. And, in the past, and, states are developing more comprehensive ALDs. But in the past, they were more representative of the standards than being, covering every standard and every nuance of every standard. So tell me if that's correct or not, because that's has implications for writing ALDs, definitely.
You're absolutely correct. I would not use this process that I've just described if there hasn't been a principled approach to the test design. So you wouldn't do this for a state that has developed items and then developed the ALDs, because it's probably not going to work as well. Then you'd want to use a different method. It also probably doesn't work as nicely for a situation where you have a policy model of where you want to get to with your impact data, because then there are other models of standard setting that are more appropriate. So this would be for a situation where you've developed your ALDs and then you're using templates, and that's where the department has been moving. They're doing task templates this summer and using the range ALDs and the task templates as well.
So Christina, it sounds like they never see impact data about, at the end of the day, what % of students will end up in each classification category. And I know one of the things that happened with the last round were people, and it was kind of a combination of pretty aggressive cuts at the top end and labeling. So that at the end of the day, a 4th grade parent would get a report that said their student was not college and career ready. They were on track, but they weren't college and career ready. those teachers were looking at the MAP scores saying, wow, it looks like you've got to be above the 90th percentile to be college and career ready. And so it was sending this weird message that maybe only 10% of kids ought to think about college. Is there a place in here where you see the impact? And again, that may be more labeling than the process of the standard setting.
So certainly impact data is typically a requirement of standard setting. So the idea is that the teachers focus on the alignment and that the policy making body focuses on the policy review. And so that would be some key stakeholders that are focusing on the data task, which is the impact data, and the teachers are focusing on their task, which is alignment and really setting the cuts based on their expertise in content.
So Christy, a couple thoughts on this, and this does connect back to the item difficulty modeling discussion that we had earlier. So let me preface this by saying I would support you guys moving forward with a pilot study to kind of further evaluate and then hopefully refine the methodology. But the couple thoughts are in describing the process as going through establishing recommendations for cuts and then modifying the range ALDs. It is deja vu for me from the 1996 presentation that Dan and Ross and everybody did on Bookmark, where standards were set and then the policy definitions were then changed. I would disagree with that approach, and I would discourage it because the range ALDs are intended to be policy guidance for the standard setting committee. So to change that is really then changing interpretation of the standards that really isn't within the purview of the content experts. It really should be the state kind of driving that. So that would be the primary comment. And that's also why, because this is a data dependent model in terms of how the score points are rank ordered at the starting point, it is pretty important for you to be pretty confident kind of where the items map to before you start asking people to make those judgments. And the reality is, as we saw from the item difficulty modeling, there is quite a bit of overlap when you start to look at the range ALDs mapped to empirical difficulty. And so to Cindy's point, by the way, I totally agree. I actually like placing the policy responsibility on a policy body instead of asking teachers to do that for various reasons. Just, you know, they're trapped by having to make a policy determination that then impacts accountability and everything. So I'm totally okay with that. But I think the outcome is going to be probably something that then becomes more of a policy tolerance activity as a subsequent step to what you might come up with recommendation wise. The alignment piece, I think, is really good. I think this is a move in the right direction in terms of trying to, from a design perspective, get cut scores set up, kind of by design up front. But I mean, just don't underestimate what the policymakers will then do with those recommendations for the cuts. So then I turn to the department to say, when your policymakers do that, then you have to then go back and adjust the range ALDs. Because if they adjust the policy, then the cut scores now won't match, because that's not what the standard setting panel was using to make their judgments. So all that to say, I like the idea, would support it going forward, but I definitely would say this is still a policy driven process, and to not like mess with the ALDs after the content piece of it, wait for the policymakers to interject, then you likely are going to have to go back and revisit it. But that way, it's not something that the teachers are having to be responsible for.
So I want to make sure I'm hearing and articulating your perspective correctly. So rather than have them adjust the ALDs in the third round, you would be more comfortable making sure that the alignments are super tight, calculating the cut scores. And the idea for this is hopefully that those overlaps, if we spend more time in focusing on the alignment, that those will get better. And then the adjustments that you have to make for the cut scores, just go ahead and, if that happens, go ahead and make those adjustments at that time after the policy. So you're not in different loops. And then you have a rationale based in policy on why you're adjusting the cuts, the ALDs at that time.
Yeah, and I think it's less of an if it happens, but when it happens. I've never seen a policy in the education space. I've never seen a policy body without either a lot of discussion or making some tweak to some grade, some content. It's really rare that they just adopt it without feedback, especially if the teachers didn't have impact data to inform them in the process.
Yeah, and then there's the whole issue of moderation across grade
Yeah.
level. So I like what you're saying, Chad. Practically speaking, how's that going to all happen and when? And also, when the cuts go to the policymakers, to what extent can you report sort of here's a range, because it's not perfect. There's some error in the process. And so not to give them like a blank slate, well, here's the recommendation, now do what you want to do. You have to tell them, the process has some integrity, and yeah, there was some people who weren't totally in, only 75% of the people were in agreement here. So there could be a possibility that these cuts can move up or down a little bit, and you have that much space in which to do it. Otherwise, you're really going outside of the group and you're questioning the whole process.
That's a great point. Christy, the other thing that in reading about and then being involved in some of the item descriptor matching methods, in terms of characterizing it, I think one of the ways to help characterize it to folks too is, because I think people will get it confused with bookmarks sometimes because it does have similar features. I think honestly, it's more of a explicit judgment activity, but then once you get into the analysis and kind of recommendation phase, it does start to feel more like a contrasting groups, because you're trying to minimize classification, you're trying to maximize classification consistency in terms of finding that point of distinction between where people are saying, okay, here's where representation of a particular range ALD ends, and here's where another one begins, and where do we find that point? And so I really do think it's a nice blend of content anchored, judgmental item level methods that then take advantage of some of the examinee or student-centered method analyses techniques to try to minimize misclassification.
Jeremy, were you looked like you were gonna have
No,
feedback?
about every time I was going to say something, the TAC members hit it right on the head, and I didn't need to add anything. So I thought it was better if I just shut up. So.
Other comments, other thoughts from the group? And Christy, just for maybe out of curiosity more than anything, is there anything about the science assessment in particular that concerns you relative to being able to potentially apply this to ELA and mathematics going forward? Are there any features of that assessment that would be different or cause you to rethink if the results of the pilot of the kind of the trial or the pilot are successful?
That's a good question. So we do know that the item bank right now does not fully represent the intended blueprint. based on what we are seeing in the alignments of the items to the blueprints in terms of the intended content pieces and the SEPs and those pieces that the department prioritized as wanting to measure. And then the second piece is, I believe in some cases we only have, or one of the grades, Jane or Mary will jump in and correct me. I think one of the grades only has 2 items that are classified at the high ALD level, and the department has moved to using the ALDs as the cognitive model, because as I'm sure you know, that DOK is not well loved in the science community. So we do know that we've got to be very strategic, and Mary's team has worked very hard to build templates and to build on the things the department's been doing with EdCount, so that we can try to build tasks this summer to target areas of the blueprint that we already know we need to fulfill. And we're likely in next year, we're going to be, not likely, we are going to be in an operational field test situation.
And they're actually in the process of writing those right now, starting yesterday. So we are looking at targeting very specific ALDs in different pieces of the topics for science to make sure we get a better range.
Just as a side note, that the standards, the new science standards are just broad enough with the new task structure that we're not able to field test the amount of tasks that we'd like to at a specific rate, and therefore even not even able to test everything in a particular year. There's some things that we'll get to more often over a 3-year span. So that's just building out item bank, quote unquote, a task bank, right? That's large enough to take care of this is extremely difficult with the new science standards. We like what we're producing a lot, but just the amount of content the amount of effort to produce the content is very difficult.
Is this the tasks in the science test what they call item clusters, like almost like a passage set, but you have a stimulus and maybe up to 6 questions based on the stimulus?
Yeah, I think we're calling them tasks and prompts within tasks. Yeah, but that's the item clusters are what they are.
Yeah. So how is that handled? Because it's like an ELA test in a way where some items will test harder than others within the item cluster.
Yeah, well, we just finished the field test, so we're eager to dig into all of those stats and everything. It was supposed to happen last year, but because of the pandemic, it was canceled. So we're eager to dig into that information and see what everything tells us. So
you're gonna do a pilot of this standard setting method, is that right?
Yeah, that's what the proposal is, to take this approach with the field test that we've already done and do a small pilot with it to see how it works. So as we get to next year, then we can decide if we want to go forward with this procedure to actually do the standard setting.
And this is at what, grades 3 and 5 and a high school test?
Yeah, 5 and 8 only, actually, because we're using ACT at the high school.
Okay, 5 and 8. So I'm just wondering, sometimes with a pilot, you have an opportunity to vary, if you have 2 groups at a grade level, to have a little variation in the procedure to see if something works better than something else. I don't know, there's an opportunity there to do a little bit of NAEP-like standard setting research, if you will.
Sure.
Make it over that.
Yeah.
And how many people would be on a panel?
I don't know, Christy, what you probably have a better idea how many you were thinking.
I think for a pilot, I think we would just look at doing 3 to 6 people. I think that's very similar to what NAEP does. You can have it for a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also, the other part of it is that the content team has tagged the bank with the ALDs. So we have those as well. What other things are you thinking about as you hear the adventures in science?
I'm sorry, the question?
I was going to say, are there other things that you're thinking about as we think about piloting this? Because Chad asked if there was anything unique to science that we needed to be aware of.
I think just that sampling element. So the connect, the similarity to ELA from a clustering standpoint is, can't be underestimated. With ELA, the nice thing is a lot of the skills are still kind of threaded throughout. Science, sometimes it's not the same. It's not the same skill that's being cut across, and that context could change it quite a bit. So to Jeff's point about, maybe this as a research opportunity, depending on whether it's in budget or something, if you could have kind of two configurations of a science assessment at 5th grade that represent, just like a different sampling in terms of context or content, to see whether or not the groups would converge or not, might be a useful part of the experiment. To Christy, I think, though, reinforcing a point, Christy, that you made is the whether it is for ID matching or similar item sort of mapping methods, actually for any standard setting method, in order for it to work, the test has to have the capacity to support the number of cuts you're trying to make. And so if it doesn't have that sort of distribution, so for example, if you don't have enough items at the upper end of the range to be able to do that second cut, then you may want to focus the study just on the cut that that you have the part of the distribution for, and do like a met, not met or something, just to avoid, I guess, I don't know, I'm trying to help you to avoid results that would suggest that there's a problem.
Really nice idea. Appreciate it.
What else? Anything else? Cindy, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I always have concerns with science because there is not continuity of the specific concepts that are taught at each grade level across all districts. And so one of my concerns would be whether the assessment inadvertently ends up measuring the match to the concepts or the specific tasks that students did in their classroom versus their progression of knowledge. I think that's why ACT, our science teachers would say, ACT really doesn't test their science knowledge. It tests their reading and critical reading and problem solving skills, because what they need to know is already in the passage. And I think that is a thread all the way through science, because as you mentioned, Chad, science isn't like language arts. I'm going to continue to teach part of speech and semicolons and all of those things all the way across. It's not as specific as, did I do rocks in 5th grade or did I do something else?
Well, this has been very, very helpful. So we'll look and see how the department wants to proceed. And I don't have anything else on the agenda. I don't know if Melinda or Jing, if either of you have anything else, or Chad, how you want to table the discussion on this.
Yeah, let me just ask the TAC directly. Does anyone have concerns or problems if the department were to move forward with pilot testing the methodology that Christy described?
I was just thinking, just something occurred to me. If this is a new method, and the criticism is going to be, would it have turned out differently if you if you used a tried and true method, if you just used the bookmark, would the data come out a lot different? And I don't know, if you're doing a pilot, what if you, just to see that this method doesn't generate wildly different results than a more traditional method to generate. I don't know which set of results are valid, but people are going to look, if you're only identifying 10% of the kids as having met the target with this method, people are going to say maybe it was the method and not the students. I'm just trying to, again, like you were saying, Chad, avoid this not working and being in a point where you have to say, well, we tried it and we didn't like the results, we're going to use another method. And you're just trying to get to what answer you're trying to get to. I know it's a little bit tricky. So just think through sort of the unintended consequences. I really like, on its face, I love the method. It seems really terrific, but you just got to think through the implications in the field, depending on how the results turn out.
That's a great point, Jeff. And so, yeah, so Christy, if it is possible, and I don't know that you need to do well, I guess you're only dealing with 2 grade levels here. I was thinking that if you're doing grades 3 through 8, that would be a lot, but if you could have almost like a control group of some sort at the point of comparison, I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, well, Jeff's earlier, about having 2 different groups and slightly changing the methodology. You could definitely do at least one group with this method and one group with another, or the more traditional methodology. But theoretically, you could even do 3 groups. One with that way you're testing them, it gets that control group or whatever, and to some extent, right? If you're just playing a little bit and doing a little bit of research.
Yeah, especially if, I don't know, Christy, if you guys have anybody grad student wise who needs a thesis or a dissertation, but this could be nice research.
Oh, I had not thought about that. That's a great idea.
Jeremy, do you need another dissertation?
No, I don't need anything. Thanks. I knew you were going to say that. I knew it. I was already hitting the button so I could say no. I'm done. Never again. No, never. I shouldn't say that. I love doing the research. The writing it all out was the problem.
So I guess the question becomes, and I don't want to extend the meeting a whole lot here, but what is the purpose of the pilot? Is it to try out the procedure? Can people do it? Or is it something else? Does it give you more valid results? We can see it's giving you more information because you're going to get DOK level and alignment studies and all this other stuff out of it. So I guess the question is, what are the real questions here? Is it to get the best results? Is it an implementation question? Can we really do it? Maybe fine tune that a little bit and think about implications.
So some of it, I think, goes back to the ALD question in general, is trying to make ALD information more useful to teachers. Once again, if in general, if we keep coming back to that idea that how can state assessments be, meet the purposes that they are intended for in law and everything, but also be actually more useful to teachers. One of the ways that we think we can do that is make ALDs more informative and more useful to teachers. Seems to be one of the things that we keep coming back to again. So that's where I'll go with the answer to that. I think Christy will say about the same thing, but if she has a different answer, I'd love to hear it too.
Well, the question then is, what's the metric? How are you going to know if you were successful?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I do think that the rater statistics and the reliability, I think that's important, because the whole hypothesis is that range ALDs, we want to help improve the coherence of the educational system. And so if teachers have one idea about what alignment looks like, and it's alignment to a lower level than level 2 to the on track, then students aren't getting the opportunities to learn. So one of the things that I like about this is that, which came from Susan and Chad in 2013 is that idea about checking the rater agreement. And that's also evidence that teachers can do this. So for the pilot, I think we want to look at how good is the agreement that we can get in terms of convergence. I think we want to see if we get stuck along the way. The teachers agree, and then we don't like where the cuts turn out. I think those are things that we can look at, and then you have to think about, okay, to your point, how are you moderating it? What are you going to do with the policy panel? Are we going to have to retag it? What does that process look like in a way that makes us efficient? Because the goal is to get 2 for the price of 1 as a part of a coherent system.
And when is the pilot?
Well, we have the field test data.
Oh, okay.
And so when it gets calibrated, then we would be able to, like, maybe in the fall, set up a pilot.
In general, things are really difficult to set up anything with teachers right now because they're burnt out. And so trying to figure out, I mean, anything that we were thinking of doing this last year was either not able to be done or it was really limited because teachers were already spent. They just didn't have that. And the sub shortage is a real issue. There are no subs. Nobody has them. And those that were available needed to be used for actual, medical reasons as opposed to any professional development activities, which most people would classify this under because it's not, so in general, it's trying to balance all of those things. We're really interested in these things, but trying to find opportunities to do them. We assume that gets a little more easy next year, but it's not going to get easy by any means, because we're not going to be out of a sub shortage just like that. And I know that from talking to enough people that I don't even know if it actually gets better at all, to tell you the truth. The sub shortage is not something that's going away anytime soon. So,
Jeremy, I don't know what the impact will be on the data, but I think the perception is, I know that some of the move to ThreeYear was premised on people saying they wanted less assessment. Next year, I think people are going to feel like they're doing twice as much, that they're going to have to keep map growth in order to have some kind of continuity of data following the pandemic. But NSCAS isn't quite ready yet, so they'll be doing field tests. So in their view, we've doubled their testing for next year, which will be a communications and marketing hurdle, I believe.
yeah,
And it would impact the performance you get.
absolutely. And that's not lost on us at all. The winter pilot in general, because we still haven't put out the participation guidance on the winter pilot yet, because we're trying to figure out how to minimize that. In actuality, right, if none of this change was occurring, the only additional double testing we would be doing would be in winter, because people were already double testing in spring, right? And we're not doing anything in the fall. So, but that one test as being the possibility of a double test, it really impacts people's perceptions quite a bit. And it's really hard for them to get past that, even though in the next year, theoretically, if everything works, then we eliminate all that double testing that's already occurring in the spring overall, right? But perception definitely rules the day there. So yeah, I understood. And we're still trying to figure out if we can, with the winter pilot, what we should do, if we should have a minimum footprint, if we should, anyway, it's a pretty complicated, I guess. So, but your point is a good one.
Okay. Well, we are getting close to the time where I said that we'd finish up. And so any last thoughts or comments for the group? If not, thanks, Melinda and Jing and Christy and NWEA team for the presentations today. Very helpful. Thanks to the TAC for your feedback and guidance. Jeremy, any closing thoughts on behalf of the department?
Yeah, I would just like to thank everybody from our assessment vendors and presenters today, and the TAC members, those of you that did those extra sessions, working sessions with us, and just coming back again for this follow-up. We really appreciate the input and the questions. They're very beneficial to us as we keep trying to move forward. And so I hope everybody get some time off this summer to do something other than whatever you have to do normally, and get some recharge as we come back and do additional things here in the future. So you'll hear from us probably sooner than later. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeremy. And again, thanks everybody. And hopefully our next meeting we'll be able to get back together in person.
That'd be great.
All right. Take care. We'll talk to you all soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.